Hi there, I'm Evelyn Block, and this is Invisible Thread. Today I'm talking with Beatriz Chachamovits, environmental artist, ocean conservationist, and just one of my favorite people in the world. I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. Beatriz is incredible. Here she is. Hello, hello, Beatriz Chachamovits. I'm so excited to be talking to you today.
Hi, my love. I'm so excited to be here with you. This is wonderful. I'm so happy that we get to have this conversation together.
Beatrice is an environmental artist, ocean conservation maven, and I really wanted to just set the tone and ask you to explain to us what you're doing today in your practice.
Wow, that's a very open-ended question
Want me to be
today.
more specific?
No, it's fine. It's fine. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. Um, so nowadays, well, let's talk about today. So my practice is very much based in my obsession in the ocean and how important this ecosystem is to our life, our present, and our future. And I've been working a lot with ceramics, drawings, and installations. And today I'm focusing a lot on this world building relationship of talking about the ecosystem that we're losing, but at the same time trying to highlight and celebrate things that we still have. So the work isn't just about doom and gloom, it's also about how these ecosystems are actually crucial. And there's still a lot to talk about. There's still a lot to celebrate. There's still a lot of species hanging on. And this comes into form a lot through this new part of my work where I'm creating this mythological beings that are part animal, part human, that are based on the 12 female archetypes. And I chose to base them on the 12 female archetypes because to me, the ocean is female. And just thinking that she's our first mother, all the life came through the ocean and from the ocean and within the ocean. So that's kind of how I'm moving forward with my practice nowadays.
Amazing. What are the 12 female archetypes?
So there are so many ways of like thinking about the 12 female archetypes, and there are many studies that look into them. But the way that I kind of figure them out was looking at Carl Jung's way of defining the 12 female archetypes, also looking at a mysticism part of how the 12 female archetypes are defined, and creating a sort of mashup of what it meant to me and these archetypes that spoke to me. And so, for example, we have the three major ones, which are the three sides of femalehood, which is the maiden, the crone, and the mother. These are like part in so many of our mythological knowledges and storytelling. And then this expands a lot into the wild woman and the lover and the heroine, the muse, the mage, the queen. There's so many of them, and all these 12 archetypes kind of form a base of this way that I'm looking at how we can reintroduce kinship in between humanity and the ocean. Um, and then the way that I see this is like relating each of these archetype to a specific marine creature. So, and then making drawings about them.
Oh my God. I did get to see the drawings. They're wonderful and they're so detailed. And I feel like when I'm looking at them, I'm immersed in an entire world of that creature and that archetype. Like they're just so detailed. Do you have a favorite of the ones you created?
Ugh.
I
That's such
know
a tough
choosing favorites
question.
is tricky.
Yeah, also because, like the way that I made them, we are all of them. Um,
Mm,
and they're all sides of, all of us. But I don't know. I feel like one of my favorite ones is the Muse
mm,
because she is who inspires me to do stuff, In my collection of this series, the Muse is the coral polyp, which is, what is corals are made of. Um, and usually these drawings they're in the location that makes sense with them. So they have a very intense scientific background of studying the site, the location, who is around them, like the species that make part of this specific ecosystem. Is she in the reef? Is she in the seagrass? Is she in the mangroves? Like on the sponge flats? So who are these creatures and where do they inhabit was really important for the series. Um, yeah,
amazing. Amazing. For anyone who's listening who doesn't know, can you explain to us what a coral is?
of course. Yes, absolutely. So corals are animals. They are animals who create rocks and live in symbiosis with plants. So they're magical beings. There are little to nothing else that actually is all three things together.
Mhm,
Um, And corals are colonial creatures. So each coral that you see are thousands of polyps that comes together to form one coral. So thinking about how these creatures are in community to become one, and this thought process of one that is made of many is so beautiful to me and so poetic. That makes a lot of sense in how I think work and
mhm,
how I think today. Um, but they're also the idea of them making rocks is because certain types of corals are reef builders. So they're the ones that excrete limestone as they grow, and that's how they form the coral reef. And that's how they give topology to the ocean. And then they live in symbiosis with these tiny little plants that are inside of their tissue. And these plants called zooxanthellae, they're microscopic algae that they're responsible for doing photosynthesis inside of the coral and feeding it. And also they give corals their color. So that's a very special relationship, you
mhm,
know? There's not a lot of creatures out there that does that. Um, and the way that they behave communally really speaks about how humanity should behave in the future. That's
mm.
how I envision them as a North Star on how we can be better as people in this planet.
The muse. With all of this knowledge that you have, with this practice that you've cultivated through your work, can you share how you first got started?
Absolutely. It's one of my favorite stories.
Ooh.
So back in 2006, just a, parenthesis, I'm from Brazil. I've been in the US for 7 years. I grew up in São Paulo and I've lived there for most of my life. I have a very special relationship with a part of Brazil that is a northeast area, a state called Bahia, where I've been going for as long as I can remember. Um, and one of the times that I was in this state, I was drawing on my notebook in this island that sits in between the ocean and the river. And it's this place that is really complicated to get to. You have to take a plane, then a bus, and then a boat, and then a canoe. Like it's like, these remote island places that you have to actually really want to get there to get there. This island is called Boipeba, and it's just this most magical place I've been. And that's where I first fell in love with corals. So going back to the fact that I was drawing on my notebook, I was sitting on one of the beaches of the island, one of the ones that was closest to the town. And I was drawing algae, and at the time I was obsessed with movements of clouds and how, the shapes of the clouds relate to the shapes of the algae that I see on the shoreline, and how these mesh up became concepts of floating islands, and how these islands relate to each other. And so I was drawing these things on my notebook, and then this man approaches me and looks at my notebook and says, "Hey, you're drawing coral reefs. Did you know that?" I'm like, kinda, like these are more algae and things, but yeah, I'm super interested in corals, but I've never seen them. Then, okay, the guy disappears. We had this little conversation. 20 minutes later, he comes back with, masks and snorkels and looks at me and says, "Hey, do you want to go see them? I can take you there." And I'm like, "Okay, strange man I've never seen in my life. I'll follow you to the depths of the ocean, whatever." And there's just these times in your life where you trust your gut. And it wasn't stranger danger. It was like, oh my God, this magical creature who wants to show me this thing that I really want to know? And so I followed this man. We walked to another side of the island to this like more deserted beach spot. And then once we got there, he was like, "Hey, so, I'm gonna go in. You come in right behind me. We're gonna swim a little bit to this point of something that I want to show you." I'm like, "Okay, cool, let's go." We get into the ocean. I'm swimming after this man. This man is like freaking fish. He just so fast. And I'm like, hi, I'm not, I am not a fish yet. Can you slow down? And then, we laugh, we continue to swim. And then we get to this point where he looks at me, we stop in the ocean, he looks at me and he says, "Are you ready?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm ready." Then he says to me, "I'm gonna dive, you dive straight after me." I'm like, "Cool, let's do it." I dive after this man. This man pulls me under and shoves me inside of this tiny little cave. The tiny little cave had holes in its ceiling, and the sun would come in and come out, and it would reveal all of the life that was just sitting there. So the cave was covered with corals 360 degrees. It was insane. There was tiny fish swaying side to side. There was this beautiful yellow spotted ray on the bottom. And I was just like, "What is this?"
Oh my.
Like being encompassed by this alien world in such a small space, and everything was in there. And I was completely mesmerized and bewildered and like in awe and in shock. And I just like I couldn't speak. And I was like, "What?" And we just, it melted my brain and it refigured my whole being in a way that was really special. We spent a lot of our time going inside and outside of that cave so that I could see it and notice even more details. But then after a while, he was like, let's go a little further and let's go see the coral heads," meaning that there were gigantic, massive corals a little bit further out. And so I remember vividly going down deeper into the ocean and seeing these boulder corals that later I found out that were star corals, and they were so big. They were beautiful and they were super colorful, and the reef was alive with colors and fish, and everything was communicating. The sound of the reef was so alive. It reminded me of São Paulo, of like this bustling city, and everyone was saying hi and conversing and exchanging and being friendly and being aggressive to each other and defending their homes. And it was just whoa, what is happening here? And that was the whole day. We just did that for the whole day. And once the sun started going down, we exited the ocean, and I was like, "Oh my God, wait, why isn't anyone talking about this?" Or at least anyone that I know, have heard of, or is in my surroundings. And that day is the day that I made a vow to myself where I would talk about it. And I would talk about it with my whole being. And that was the restructuring of ideas and how I would behave as an artist for the following 20 years without seeing an end to it. And the funniest thing is, like, I have no idea who this man is. I don't remember his name. I never saw him again. And he has no idea how he shaped my entire life after that point.
What a good story. I'm like sitting here a little emotional after listening to that because I think maybe it goes for nature in general, but I think there are moments of indescribable magic that happen sometimes in life that for me have often been associated with nature, you know, whether it's an animal or an ecosystem or an experience with another human in a space like that. And to hear how profound of an impact that had on you and your life practice from that moment forward is really miraculous. And that you were open enough and trusting in that moment to be like, yeah, okay, person, I don't know. You're right. Let's go. Okay, I need to go do that. Okay.
Yeah, with the stranger
Yeah.
that I had no idea who he was and never saw him again. So yeah,
Wow.
it's just that has life sometimes has a feeling that things are meant to be.
Mm,
And to me, that this is one of them. This is like pivotal point of my life in the sense of anything before that and everything after that.
whoa. I mean, would you have said before that you had a relationship with the ocean? Or and what did that look like?
I had a normal relationship with the ocean. I
Yeah.
loved going to the beach.
Yeah.
And, every time that I left the city, I wanted to go to a coastal place.
Hmm.
I traveled a lot to the coast of São Paulo with friends growing up. I already had that, sense of bewilderment in regards to the ecosystem, but not in that depth, not in that level, nothing in relationship to what happened at that point. Um, but I've always talked about nature in my practice as I was, graduating from art school. My muse again, my muse was always nature.
Hmm.
It wasn't like being in art school, you need to understand what you want to talk about and what moves you
Hmm.
and what is the object of, whatever you're drawing or you're building or you're creating. And for me, it was always nature. It was always flowers or plants or the clouds or it was always that because São Paulo you don't have that. So in a city where everything is concrete and you can't see a lot of the sky only if you're atop of a building,
Hmm.
and that's not normal. um I was always drawn to nature, especially because as a kid, I would do summer camp outside of São Paulo in this really, really amazing place that was completely in the wilderness and cabins and like these kinds of experiences already had started to build inside of me this love and respect and want for nature. And so that's kind of how I kind of moved as a kid and as a young adult. My desires of always leaving São Paulo or exploring other places than my own city was always connected to nature.
Hmm.
Not like, oh, I want to go to another big city. I already live in one. What can I see that is not that?
Hmm. I mean, that definitely makes sense in terms of your ability to be open to a new experience like that in nature, even that desire to explore it in a more deep way or to have someone introduce you to something that would just continue to grow on that anchor, I guess. So you have this like life altering experience with this angel man who comes into your life on the beach, who also is acknowledging what you're drawing, which I think is equally as poetic of foreshadowing of your life. So what happens next? You guys, you get out of the water, you part ways, you're left with this experience that you're processing. And how do you bring that to life in your world?
I mean, living in São Paulo, you're not close to the ocean, you know?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have coral reefs. So the way that I was able to do that was by like studying myself through images and videos and films and Googling like a crazy person and doing, like deep dives into the internet and trying to figure out what are they and learning by myself and trying to figure out what shapes they have, what are the forms that they have, how they behave and what's happening with them. And as deeper and deeper that I went in that world of trying to understand the ocean or the reef itself, the more I understood that the reef was in danger.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, a lot of my work in São Paulo was based on drawings. That was from 2006, where I met this guy up to 2015. I did these drawings that were started as, imaginary creatures and fish that I didn't know that it exists, but I supposed, and drawing the whole world that they live in inside of them so that I could talk about that immersion that I saw and how that symbiotic existence of the ocean is. So everything is inside each other, everything belongs to each other, everything communicates. So the way that I would draw is by doing that. I would draw the outside of a creature and fill it with all of the life that I saw at that, in the ocean. Um, and I did that for several years. And it started going from imaginary fish to fish that was actually real to fish that was in peril. And then, like things like that. Um, I think one of the drawings that was really a turning point for me was when I drew the right whale, was the first whale that I ever drew. And I did this whole research to understand it and know why it's called the right whale, which is super somber. Um,
Hello.
my cat just came into the video. Um, and it was really shocking to me to understand that it was called the right whale because it was the right whale to hunt. So it has this gap of air in between the blubber and the skin that makes the right whale float when you kill it. Yeah. And then learning about all of these like behaviors of humanity and how, we are always taking from nature and never giving back. And the hunting and the eating and the predatory ways in which we treat our ecosystems was really distraughting to me. And then I did this drawing, and then I went into like a artist block. I had like a sort of like a crisis inside of me, and that was like around 2015. Um, because I was like, these drawings are not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Not being able to talk about how serious this is, how complicated the relationship that we have with the ocean actually is, and how much we're losing. So I had a whole year where I didn't know where to go and what to do
Mm-hmm.
on how to actually talk about this environment that I was so in love with and watching it die. And I'm still doing that.
How did you move through a block like that when it arose?
A lot of times it was just thinking. I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't even put ideas into paper. I would just go deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole of studying the reef and the inhabitants of the reef and the citizens of the reef and what's actually happening with the reef. What is coral bleaching? What is ocean acidification? What is all of this that we're doing to the most gigantic environment that we have in our planet, which is water.
Hmm.
And two ways that I was able to get out of it was one, by changing the medium. And that's when I started to work with sculpture and go way more three-dimensionally than just drawing. And the second way is instead of just making drawings of these creatures, I started making infographics where I would explain what is the thing, why is, what is ocean pollution? And then I would do a whole drawing with text that would inform people what are these things.
Hmm.
And then I did one for trash. I did one for coral bleaching. I did one for ocean acidification. I did one for long line fishing, things that were really moving me to understand how we degrade the ocean.
Hmm.
And I started doing ones that were from endangered species. And so the first one I did was for the vaquitas marinas,
Hmm.
which is one of the smallest porpoises that we have in the world in the Gulf of Mexico. That back in 2016, when I started after my blog and I started to move forward with my practice, at the time we had 60 individuals.
Wow.
Um, Nowadays we have 13. So this is a species that is actually disappearing in front of our eyes.
Hmm.
um, and learning why they were dying, what was happening with them, what was their environment like, and started to create these drawings that would actually tell the story of these species and their endangerment.
Wow.
Yeah.
Were you able to distribute any of the infographics? Like, were you working with a school or was it an extension of your art practice?
It was an extension of my art practice. I
Yeah.
had a solo show where I showed all of them alongside this first time that I did this really important piece about ocean acidification
Hmm.
and how this phenomenon makes creatures and their shells and their exoskeleton melt because the ocean is ever so more acidic,
Hmm.
and so the pH unbalance of the ocean itself is harming the creatures. And the way that
Wow.
I did that was I started by doing three-dimensionally, working with air dry clay. Because at the time, ceramics is costly. It's, something that you need to have a kiln for. You need to have a whole space and environment for ceramics. And so I didn't get to ceramics yet at this point, but I was working a lot with air dry clay.
Hmm.
And I did an experiment once. I took a piece of air dry clay that I modeled and I put it inside a container with water and I watched it melt away.
Of ocean water.
Just water,
Okay.
normal water.
Hmm.
So I did a little piece of coral and then I put it inside of a container. I shoved water inside of the container and in 12 hours, that piece wasn't there anymore. It was just mush on the floor of the Tupperware. Yeah. And I
Whoa.
was like, oh my God. Like, when the light bulb comes on, and I
Yeah.
was like, that's exactly what's happening with ocean acidification. That's crazy.
Hmm.
And so I made these fish tanks that were round, like portholes. Um, and I filled them with these creations of different coral species, forming a tiny little ecosystem inside of the fish tank. And for the exhibition, I did a performance where I went in and I put water into some of them. So I think I made 11 and I put water in 6 of them. Um, and then during the performance, I would put water inside and slowly the sculptures would start to inflate and break down, which was really crazy to watch.
Hmm.
Uh, and so I actually did the first one that I filled in with water was way before so that people could see that they were already, breaking up. And then I left a couple without water. And then by the end of the exhibition, everything that had water had completely dissolved. So this was the first piece that I did that was ephemeral. And
Hmm.
that's, a big deal in my practice because a lot of people know that I destroy a lot of my work.
Well, I remember the exhibition that you did. I'm not remembering where you did it. That was the pieces. So at this point, you were definitely already working with ceramics and you had filled the room, the floor with different corals, and you had the participants actively have to cross the room, which meant that you were required to destroy your art in the process.
You could not destroy if you followed
Okay.
someone else that had already created a path,
Okay.
but you're not like that, you
Hmm.
know? Yeah, but that was the second iteration that I've done of this piece. I did the first one in Brazil. That was
Hmm.
way smaller. It wasn't a whole floor, but it's in the same vein of these ephemeral works that actually shows the destruction and the die-off that is happening in the ocean, be it as, an agent that is just water itself or humanity.
Hmm.
So these things are really important in my practice because I feel like participation or things that are happening in front of your eyes are really, really, they really seed in more for me so than just looking at something.
Hmm.
And not to devalue the work of artists that are amazing, that that you create a piece that is static and it already moves you really deeply because it can. But the way that I felt that I could move people more in regards to what was happening in the ocean was by inviting them to be part of the destruction or the rebuilding of it.
Hmm. A bit of choose your own adventure.
Yeah, or a bit of like come participate in what is actually happening and
Hmm.
be an agent of that happening, be it the destruction or the rebuild, And I've
Hmm.
done exhibitions and works that are both in that both ways.
So what was the transition into the ceramic world? Was there some a happening that pulled you into ceramics?
Mhm. There is this community centers in Brazil, all over Brazil. Um, and one of them in São Paulo invited me to do a piece outdoors
Hmm.
for this like cement circle they had in the place where kids would play. And I couldn't do air dry clay because this would be super, easy to break. And
Hmm.
this wasn't a participatory work at that point. And then this was the first time that I actually made sculptures out of ceramics because I had a budget. And in having a budget for a project, you can be a little bit more daring.
Hmm.
You're not risking your own money. You're knowing that you have a budget to try out things. And I had budget to buy clay and to fire clay and to work with people that were a little bit more in the know-how of making clay. So I did that. I created this installation on top of this cement circle that was a circle of species of corals. And that was the first time that I worked with clay, and I was like, oh my God, what is this? I'm just like modeling Earth into whatever it is I can imagine. Hell yes,
Amazing.
Yeah, because the touch of clay and the way that it's elastic and the way that it has phases, like how you can model it up until a certain point, you can, carve it up until a certain point. There's so many ways of working with clay, but clay demands you to pay attention to it and to its own time.
Hmm.
So, which is very different from modeling clay
Hmm.
these air dry clays that I was working with. And that blew my mind. I was like, yes, this is it. Like, whoa, I can build and I can do whatever I want and anything that I can imagine because dry clay has certain constraints on the way that you work with it. And
Hmm.
clay also has constraints, but it's in a different space. It's just more open and you have way more possibilities with it. And I fell in love with the material. I like really, really connected with working with ceramics. And that was right before I moved to the US. That was in beginning of 2018 when I presented that work.
How did you have the confidence to jump into working with clay in that way? Were you able to find a mentor, or had you worked with it enough before that you were like, okay, I got this, or you just did it?
I just did it.
Yes.
I was like, I want to do this.
Some
Let's do this, you know?
sometimes that's just how it goes. You just do it.
Yeah, I know. It's just like some materials you choose and some materials chooses you.
Hmm.
That
This one
happens.
chose you.
Yeah, for sure.
Amazing. So you come to the US, you start working with clay more and more, and it becomes like your main medium.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay.
The way I landed in the US is very particular. Because I came here to do a residency in the studios of Key West. I didn't come straight
Mm.
to Miami, you know?
Hmm.
I
I
lived in
did not know that, but
Yeah,
that
yeah,
makes a lot of sense.
yeah. I lived in Key West for 7 months. The residency was 1 month long, and then I just couldn't leave, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Completely surrounded by ocean. Everywhere there was coral reefs, everywhere there were people talking about the ocean, connected to it, researching it, diving into it, taking people out, like a lot of fishermen, a lot of dive masters, a lot of scientists, like that connection with the ocean and living in an island like that. I had never done that before. And I loved it. I loved it so much. I feel like the most freeing time of my life was when I lived in Key West.
Wow.
Yeah, it was absolutely perfection. But, you know, I couldn't be an artist in Key West. I couldn't have a studio in Key West after I left the residency. Key West is super small. It's super, 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 super not affordable.
Hmm.
Prices there are crazy for rent. It's just like there's no space in the island. It's a complex living situation in Key West. And the way I was able to stay for 6 months there was I was living with my friend's mom, and she had a bedroom available, and she knew my work and she loved my work, and she gave me a really wonderful price rent-wise that I could afford at the time. Um, and I was working at my friend's restaurant as the cashier.
Hmm.
So I was having a very low-key life, but I was having a lot of time in the ocean.
I
And
love that.
that's really how I started to understand the Florida Reef Tract and who lives here, what's happening here, like how things work and what are the diseases that are affecting it? What are, the societal problems that are wreaking havoc on it? So this was like 7 months of intense research and being inside of the ocean almost every single day, looking at them, communicating with them, talking to people, asking these scientists and these fishermen what they've been noticing of difference, the size of fish, the identification of corals, how things have changed in the past, what was there that wasn't, how are we losing? So all of these questions that after moving to Miami led my practice and the way that I thought work and the way that I created installations really was the base of it.
Hmm. How do you navigate such heavy topics? Because they are, they weigh on you. They weigh on me. That we are both in South Florida at the moment, and I feel so lucky to be here. I love the access that we have to the ocean as well, but it weighs on your mind and on your heart, especially when you are, such an admirer of that space and participant in it. So how do you navigate that weight?
Well, for a long time, I navigated by making works.
Mhm.
of how I felt.
Mhm.
Uh, that's why I made that work where I made people walk over and destroy the corals. Not that I prompt people to destroy, but people just have that behavior. And I wanted to understand human behavior so that I could work with it to reverse it. Um, but then it became a point where I got really eco-anxious and I got scared of the future. And it was a really big weight
Mhm.
on me just by creating works that was talking about the death of an ecosystem. And I did that for like, I don't know, 5 years here in the US. And then it really got me.
Mhm.
And that's why after that, I started changing the work so that it would also bring me some lightness. And that's when I went from talking about the death of an ecosystem to the celebration of what is still there, because I needed that. I needed to understand that there are still things to fight for. There are still areas and creatures and species that we can protect. And there is still hope for an ecosystem that is vanishing away in a veiled place that people don't see.
Mhm.
So that was really complicated for me. And that's how I started making works of how people can rebuild this ecosystem. Um, and so I made interactive pieces where people would take pieces of corals that I've made and put them in a base and how can I reconstruct the ocean. I started diving with Rescue a Reef and partnering up with scientists that were talking about coral reef restoration. And I started planting corals underwater. And I started doing all of these things that could uplift me and change the narrative and change the way that I thought about the ecosystem and society because I was so pissed with, people.
Mhm. So that's kind of a perfect lead into what gives you hope about today and everything that you're doing and all of these now more celebratory works that you're focusing on.
I think the most that has given me hope is the people that surrounds me. My friends and my scientific counterparts and my collaborators and this greater community of people that I really care that I found here in Miami.
Mhm.
And that gives me a lot of hope because I know that they truly, genuinely care and they are doing everything that they can.
Mhm.
Um, and as we move forward, there's a lot of scientific advancements on coral reproduction and, you know, trying to de-escalate the problems in the ocean. There's, so many symposiums that I've been to that are scientists talking about problem solving and artists even more talking about the ocean and making people realize that this ecosystem is important to us. So it's not just looking at me and my practice and how I can make this better. It's being part of a community that everyone wants that.
Mhm.
I feel like that is actually how I was able to lift myself away from this anxiety that, you know, everything came to be when I was uh, diving and seeing corals die in front of me.
Mhm.
Um, and seeing the loss of species and the loss of things that are always happening. But at the same time, there are so many people who care.
Mhm.
And I feel like if I'm inserted in a space where people really care and there's so many people doing something about it, then I'm not doing stuff in vain because I'm part of a larger chorus that is communicating what we need as humans, as a whole planet, as a society, as South Florida, as Miami. So all of these things really helped me and really made me feel like I'm part of something bigger in a positive way, not in a negative one.
Mhm. It's really beautiful. I feel like sometimes just taking a second to think through perspective and how we're approaching a subject can really change it.
Yeah.
I also love that you're talking often about community and connection and how everything comes together in your work, how you approach your work, and how you approach your life. Was community always something that was a part of your world, or that also came through the art practice?
I think it was, I think both, I would say. Um, Being in Brazil and being Brazilian, the concept of personal space doesn't exist, number one. I only learned that concept when I moved to the US. So, in a lot of ways, I've learned how to be more independent and more solo in the US, but I've also learned how to share my practice in a community, which is different from São Paulo and Brazil. So I think it is shifted. It's the opposite, you know?
Mhm,
In my personal life, even though I have a lot of friends and community and all that, I am still really way more solo in the US than I was in Brazil. In Brazil, like there, like my friends would just come home. Like there was no, are you there? Can I come? Or can I call you? Like that doesn't, you just pick up the phone and call. Like there's
mhm,
no barrier in that sense. I was always surrounded by friends. Always, I grew up with a lot of friends coming to my house, being in, my dinner table with my parents. I have like a very close group of women that we do everything together in São Paulo. But then my practice was really lonely and it was really solitary. There wasn't people who understood what I was doing. People were like, "Why are you talking about corals in landlocked São Paulo? Why aren't you talking about, trees and the solar system?" And I'm like, because I'm not interested.
mhm,
I want to talk about the ocean because I still think genuinely think that talking about ocean in landlocked areas is as important as it is talking about in coastal places
mhm,
because everything that happens in the mainland affects the ocean as well. We know that all drains leads to the ocean, and everything that people do in a place that is not connected to the ocean will impact the ocean as well, because the ocean is our most gigantic blanket of absorption of CO2.
mhm,
So it doesn't matter if you're in a coastal city or if you're in the mainland or if you're in the freaking mountains, everything affects the ocean. And
mhm,
that's something that I really th tried to convey in São Paulo, and it was complicated. At the point 7 years ago when I left Brazil, environmentalism in the art world wasn't a thing.
mhm,
Nowadays it's different, after COVID, after, almost the Amazon in Brazil being almost completely destroyed. Like there's so much that people are paying attention now. And there are more and more artists in Brazil that are environmentally oriented. But when I left Brazil, that wasn't a thing.
mhm,
People thought I was strange.
mhm,
Um, and that made my practice really lonely there. And here is the opposite. Here I found myself completely enveloped and hugged and raised by a city and a community that understands the importance and the value of environmentalism. Even though Miami is always constantly destroying its own history and expanding and developing and making, a lot of fuss in regards to the environmental and the environment around it, there's still so many people who care and who are pushing for better rules, for more protection, for lines that are stricter. And there is, a lot of fight here.
mhm.
And that really changed the way that I feel in regards to my work. So in my work, I'm not lonely anymore. I'm a
Mm,
bigger voice.
that's really beautiful. I feel like there's a lot of value in finding community that supports your passions and where your heart is. Our
For
hearts
sure.
deserve to feel supported.
Yeah, and I'm so thankful for South Florida in general and Miami mostly, because it allowed me to be an artist 100%. That's what I do
Mhm,
with my life. That's how I make my dough. That's how I pay my bills. That's how I'm able to succeed and exist and thrive in a place that actually gives me space to be all of that.
It's really special.
Yeah.
Well, what is exciting you the most right now? Whether it be something in work or something in life?
I mean, I think what is exciting me most unusually is about work.
That's
Because,
fine.
yeah, no, and also in my case, work is life. There
Hmm.
is no separation. My art practice is my life practice, and it's how I behave in the world. And so th those things are completely inseparable to me. But I think I'm very excited about residencies that I'm about to do, that are in different parts of the US, in different islands of the US, in different oceans of the US, and parts of the oceans that I haven't been or haven't studied. And I feel like as much as I am obsessed with South Florida and its environments and, the reef, the storyline is bigger than that. All of the oceans are interconnected. All of our ecosystems are interdependent. And that's something that I want to bring into my practice. I want to start connecting Miami and South Florida waters to other waters of the US, and then
Mm,
hopefully out in the world.
I love that. I think that that's very important and as special as anything else you've said in this conversation because you have really shared so much beauty. But I also love nature and gardens, as you know. And I
Mhm.
remember being asked by a friend. I was working at Fairchild at the time, and Fairchild sometimes does collaborations with the Kampong, which is in another part of Miami. And I hadn't realized until this was maybe 5 years ago that the Kampong is a sister garden to another garden, the National Tropical Botanic Gardens, which are in Hawaii,
Mhm.
because we are at similar latitudes. So it makes sense for those spaces to be connected. So I really love that you're expanding on that map and making those connections because they're not so far off, maybe not as far as one might think.
For sure. Yeah, and on that note of Hawaii, I just delivered a commission piece where I had to look at Florida corals and Hawaiian corals and make a piece that represented these both of these ecosystems. So
Ooh,
yeah, so that expansion and that knowledge and that understanding and that correlation of spaces, of oceanic spaces, is actually like already happening, and that's what I want.
love to hear that. Well, so in this theme of the things that you're excited about and working on, and work also being life, I love thinking about life and work that way because then work doesn't feel like work, I think, in the more traditional sense that I know I was raised with when thinking about what I conceptualized as what work would be or what work is. How would you define success for yourself?
I mean, I think something that I've already touched base on, success is being able to do what I love fully. And that is the most success I could ever imagine, is to be 100% of my time an artist.
Mm-hmm.
If it connects to education, to science, to whatever, to public speaking, to podcast interviews, to whatever it is that feeds into that love of what I want to do with my life, I'm already successful in that way.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, well, as we wrap up the conversation, what advice would you give your younger self?
Hmm. I would tell my younger self that you're doing great.
Yes, you are.
Keep going because the sky's the limit, and you don't know where you're going to go with all of the love that you have for this ecosystem and for your life and for your practice.
I love that. Thank you. My last question, kind of a
Mhm.
two-parter,
Okay.
also very off topic, but maybe not. We'll see. A favorite song and a favorite movie of all time or of right now, doesn't have to be specific.
Wow. This is so hard.
It's hard, I know.
I would say I don't know if I can say a favorite song. I can say a favorite band. Does that work? But
Okay,
what
okay, okay.
Okay, if I'm gonna say a song that I've been obsessing about like for the last year or so is a song called Weak in Your Light from Nation of Language.
Mm,
And it's
okay.
about love, this deep, deep love. And to me, it's always, people can listen to it and think about romantic love, but to me, really always, always comes down to my obsession with the ocean. And every time I listen to it, I feel even more connected to it.
Ooh, I just got chills. Okay. I don't know this song. So I'm like, I've gotten so many great sound bites from people at this point for me to go explore. So thank you for
Yeah,
that.
they just did a concert for the first time in Miami at Zay and they killed it. They, wow, seriously, they're epic.
Well done.
Yeah, yeah. And they have this really nostalgic 80s vibe, which is my favorite type of music. So hi, I'm, from the 80s. So, I just like,
Hi.
wow, it just like gives me chills every time I listen to them. They're incredible. So that's, my song of the moment. I wouldn't say favorite because favorites to me are complicated. Um, and then movie. I'm thinking about it because I've been such a TV show freak lately. And not lately. When I say lately, I mean since I was 12 years old. Um, so I think one of my favorite movies is Wings of Desire by Wing Wenders.
Mhm.
It is it's just so emotional and it's so deep and it's so about human condition that really absolutely moves me every time I watch it. Um, and then I would also say I'm obsessed with Wes Anderson, like his aesthetic and his world building and his color palette and his dialogues and his weirdness. Like it all has a lot to do with how I create as well, and
Mhm.
my color palettes and my weirdness.
I was gonna say those both of those movies are incredibly appropriate and applicable to your entire art practice. I would say both the depth and then just the color scheming and display of how you show so many of your works. Like specifically when thinking about Wes Anderson, I think about your cabinets.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Please, everyone listening, go look up Beatrice's website and check out her works, past, present, and future to come pieces because they are so color filled, albeit a lot of them are white as well. But there's so much color and there's so much depth and there's so much detail. And it, I mean, it's when I said choose your own adventure earlier, I'm like, you can really see what you want to see in those pieces sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the purpose of art, actually. It's the communication of who is receiving and how.
Mhm. Well, you're nailing it.
Thank you.
Beatrice, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time for having this conversation with me and for just continuing to be such an advocate of the ocean, connection, And dare I say love.
Mhm. Thank you. Such a pleasure to be here. I love talking about things that I love. It's people that I love.
Mm. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, I'm just not gonna